Alex and the masked teenager behind the wheel had no idea their paths would collide on a quiet Friday night, turning an ordinary town into the scene of chaos, fear, and a tragedy that would haunt Brookfield forever. Brookfield was the kind of town where everyone knew each other and life followed a familiar rhythm. The streets were lined with tall maple trees whose leaves turned fiery shades of orange and red as autumn approached. On any given day, children could be seen riding their bikes along the sidewalks, their laughter echoing through the quiet neighborhoods. Neighbors tended to their gardens, waved to passing cars, and shared stories over white picket fences. There was a comforting predictability to it all, a sense that nothing unexpected could ever disrupt the slow, steady pulse of the community. Among the residents of this seemingly idyllic town was Alex, a 17-year-old high school student with an unmistakable presence. He was tall, with a mop of dark hair that constantly fell over his forehead and eyes that held a restless curiosity. Alex had always been drawn to speed and adventure, spending hours researching cars online, watching videos of street races, and dreaming about the day he could finally get behind the wheel of a car that could match his ambitions. His friends often joked that he could turn even a simple drive down the street into a thrilling experience, but Alex carried a quiet confidence that made the teasing feel more like admiration. That particular Friday evening, the air was crisp and cool, with a soft breeze rustling the leaves and the trees. Alex had just finished his homework and tossed his backpack onto the floor of his bedroom. The quiet of the house made him restless. His parents were downstairs, busy with their own routines, and his younger sister was absorbed in a television show, oblivious to the world outside her living room window. Alex's thoughts wandered to the week ahead, to school pressures, college dreams, and the endless responsibilities that seemed to hover over him. The desire to escape, even briefly, was overwhelming. He grabbed the keys to his car, a modest but reliable vehicle that had been his pride since he got his license. Sliding into the driver's seat, he felt a familiar rush of excitement as he turned the key in the ignition and the engine roared to life. The sound was comforting, almost like a signal that for this one evening he could leave behind the expectations and pressures of his daily life. As he pulled out of the driveway, the town seemed to stretch endlessly before him. The streetlights cast long shadows on the asphalt, and the quiet hum of the engine filled the silence. He drove slowly at first, savoring the feeling of freedom, the kind that only comes when the world feels paused, when nothing urgent demands your attention. The streets were almost empty, the occasional passer-by walking a dog or jogging with headphones in, completely absorbed in their own routines. Alex's mind wandered as he navigated the familiar streets, thinking about everything and nothing at once. He passed the local convenience store where a few teenagers hung out, laughing loudly and playing with their phones. He noticed the small park at the corner of Main Street, where swings swayed gently in the breeze, moving as if guided by invisible hands. The town was peaceful, almost serene, a place where nothing dangerous could ever touch its residents. Or so it seemed. The feeling of safety and calm was deceiving. Just beyond the comfort of this quiet town, events were unfolding that would shatter the sense of normalcy that had defined Brookfield for decades. What Alex didn't know was that the night ahead would bring a sudden, unforeseen twist, a moment when the ordinary and the dangerous collided, changing everything in ways that could never be undone. The quiet streets, the familiar faces, the predictable rhythm of life were about to be replaced by chaos, fear, and tragedy, leaving a mark on the town that no one could have anticipated. The evening continued calm and ordinary on the surface, but beneath it, the first threads of an unexpected story were beginning to weave themselves into the fabric of Alex's life, setting the stage for a night that would forever be remembered. The night air carried a strange tension as Alex drove further from the safety of familiar streets. The glow of streetlights flickered over the pavement, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist with every turn of the wheel. Up ahead, the convenience store sat quietly on the corner, its fluorescent lights buzzing softly. A few people lingered outside, talking in low voices, their movements almost ritualistic in their normalcy. Then, without warning, that normalcy shattered. A figure emerged near the entrance, clad in dark clothing that blended with the night. The person moved with purpose, quick and deliberate, as if each step had been calculated in advance. In an instant, the figure reached the parked car at the curb, forcing the door open and climbing in. There was no hesitation, no second thought, just the sudden, shocking act of taking someone else's property. The engine started and the car lurched forward, tires squealing against the asphalt. The stolen vehicle sped into the night, leaving stunned witnesses frozen in disbelief. Inside the stolen car, the thief's heart pounded, adrenaline surging with every second. The vehicle was more than just a means of escape. It was a tool, a symbol of rebellion, and a ticket to a dangerous kind of freedom. As the car weaved through streets and alleys, the person behind the wheel ignored stop signs, ran red lights, and narrowly avoided collisions. From the outside, it looked reckless, almost foolish, but the thief seemed to thrive on the chaos, as though the thrill of the pursuit justified the risk. Back on the street, Alex's curiosity was piqued. He hadn't seen the car taken, but he noticed the sudden disappearance of traffic that usually filled the roads at this hour. When he spotted the vehicle weaving through intersections, something in him snapped. The thrill he had sought in his evening drive transformed into a sense of urgency. Without thinking, he followed, keeping a careful distance at first. The stolen car moved like a phantom, unpredictable and fast, yet strangely deliberate, as though it were following a path only the thief knew. The streets of Brookfield, normally so safe and familiar, became a labyrinth of tension and danger. Each turn brought a new surprise: parked cars that had to be narrowly avoided, pedestrians stepping back in shock, and the occasional sound of sirens growing louder in the distance. Onlookers froze as the chase unfolded before them, unsure whether to call for help or watch in stunned fascination. The night that had begun with calm and quiet now pulsed with fear, energy, and uncertainty. Cameras mounted on buildings captured fleeting glimpses of the stolen car, recording the speed, the recklessness, and the desperation etched into every movement. The thief's actions were impulsive, yet calculated in a way that made them all the more unpredictable. It was a dangerous game, one that seemed to balance on a knife's edge between success and disaster. For Alex, the chase became more than just curiosity. It was a collision of responsibility and instinct, a test of judgment that he hadn't anticipated. Every second counted, every maneuver carried weight, and every choice could lead to consequences he couldn't yet imagine. What had started as an ordinary Friday evening had transformed into a moment of chaos and danger, a night that would leave a permanent mark on both the town and the lives caught in its path. The stolen car raced on, unaware of the full ripple of events it had triggered, while the quiet streets of Brookfield waited, unknowingly, for the tragedy that was about to unfold. Alex's pulse raced as he followed the stolen car through the winding streets of Brookfield. What had started as curiosity had grown into a tense mix of fear and adrenaline. Every turn of the wheel demanded his full attention, every passing car and pedestrian adding to the complexity of the pursuit. The quiet town, which had always seemed so safe and predictable, now felt like a maze, full of hidden dangers and unexpected obstacles. Streetlights flickered overhead, casting fleeting shadows that made the roads seem narrower and more treacherous than they had moments before. The stolen car darted through intersections without regard for traffic signals, cutting across lanes and narrowly missing parked vehicles. Its driver seemed to possess a reckless confidence, as if the chaos surrounding them gave them a strange kind of power. From Alex's perspective, the vehicle ahead was unpredictable, shifting between sudden bursts of speed and unexpected slowdowns, as though the thief were testing the limits of control. Each maneuver demanded a split-second decision from Alex, and the risk of a miscalculation weighed heavily on him. Police units had been alerted almost immediately. Sirens wailed in the distance, lights flashing through the darkened streets. Alex noticed them but kept a cautious distance, aware that drawing attention to himself could escalate the danger. The stolen car swerved around corners, forcing other drivers to brake sharply or pull over, and pedestrians instinctively jumped back onto sidewalks, their hearts pounding with fear. The town that had once been a sanctuary of routine now felt like the stage for a high-stakes game, one that neither participant fully controlled. As the pursuit continued, Alex began to notice the subtle details of the streets he had driven countless times. Potholes, slick patches of asphalt, and tight turns became hazards that could change everything in a heartbeat. His grip tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles white, as he calculated his next move. The thief, oblivious to the dangers around them, pushed the car harder, accelerating past speed limits and taking risks that seemed to defy logic. Each block added to the suspense, each second stretching longer than the last, until the ordinary rhythm of life had vanished completely. The chase drew attention from neighbors, some of whom stepped cautiously onto their porches, peering down the streets in disbelief. Phones were raised to capture fleeting images, their owners frozen by shock and fascination. The stolen car moved like a phantom through the town, unpredictable and untouchable, while Alex's determination grew with every second. He was caught in a strange balance between responsibility and curiosity, compelled to continue even as fear gnawed at him from the edges of his mind. Then came the unexpected twists, the sharp curves, narrow lanes, and sudden changes in traffic that forced both cars to react instinctively. A momentary miscalculation, a missed brake, could spell disaster for anyone in their path. The chase became a tense dance of speed and survival, a dangerous interplay between two lives intertwined by circumstance and choice. For Alex, the thrill of the pursuit had transformed into a heavy, almost suffocating weight, the realization that one wrong move could have irreversible consequences pressing down on him. The stolen car continued through the town, a harbinger of chaos, while Alex followed, determined yet uneasy. The street seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, and the night itself felt charged with anticipation. What had begun as a simple act of curiosity was now a test of courage, judgment, and fate, and neither the pursuer nor the pursued could foresee the tragedy that waited just beyond the next corner. The chase had reached a point where the familiar streets of Brookfield no longer felt safe. Shadows stretched longer under the flickering streetlights, and the quiet hum of the night was replaced by the roar of engines and the screech of tires on asphalt. Alex's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing faster than the car he was following. Every instinct screamed to stop, to slow down, to step back, but he couldn't. The pursuit had become a matter of survival, a test of reflexes and decision-making that left no room for hesitation. The stolen car swerved suddenly, taking a sharp turn onto a deserted stretch of road that cut through the outskirts of town. The street was narrow, flanked by overgrown trees and abandoned buildings, a place rarely traveled after dark. The sudden isolation made the danger feel immediate, tangible. The tires of the car ahead kicked up loose gravel, sending sparks of stone across the pavement. Alex's own vehicle bounced slightly over the uneven surface, forcing him to correct his steering to maintain control. The distance between them fluctuated, shrinking dangerously close with every maneuver. Then came the obstacle. A fallen branch, partially hidden by the shadows, appeared directly in the stolen car's path. The driver reacted instinctively, jerking the wheel to avoid it. The vehicle skidded, tires losing grip for a split second that stretched like an eternity. Alex followed as best he could, but the gravel under his wheels betrayed him. His car spun slightly, and in that instant, control was lost. The sound of metal scraping against asphalt filled the night as the vehicle veered off the road, colliding with a tree at a devastating angle. Emergency sirens screamed through the distance as neighbors, alerted by the noise, began to gather at the edge of the road. The scene was chaotic, smoke rising from the engine, shards of glass glinting in the streetlights, and the faint smell of burning rubber and metal lingering in the cold night air. Paramedics arrived within minutes, moving quickly to assess the damage and pull Alex from the wreckage. He was conscious but in shock, pain radiating from his body, the adrenaline of the chase giving way to the sharp reality of consequence. The stolen car had vanished, its driver, startled by the sudden turn of events, had fled on foot, disappearing into the surrounding darkness. Authorities later pieced together the sequence from witnesses and street cameras, but the immediate focus was on the aftermath. A young life nearly lost, a quiet town shattered, and the heavy weight of tragedy settling over Brookfield. The sense of normalcy that had defined the streets for decades was gone, replaced by a sobering reminder of how quickly circumstances could turn deadly. Families gathered at nearby houses, watching the flashing lights, hearts pounding, unsure of who had been hurt or how badly. The community that had once felt invincible in its calm, orderly existence now grappled with fear and disbelief. Alex, who had begun the night seeking freedom and excitement, now faced the long, painful road of recovery, both physically and emotionally. The stolen car's theft, the reckless chase, and the sudden crash had created a chain of events no one could have anticipated, leaving scars that would take years to heal. In the quiet that followed, the night seemed heavier, the streets darker, as if the town itself mourned the loss of innocence. The collision had transformed a simple Friday evening into a story of loss, danger, and irreversible consequence, leaving behind a stark lesson about the fragility of life and the unpredictable weight of choices made in a single fleeting moment. The days following the crash were filled with a heavy, unshakable tension. Brookfield, a town that had always taken comfort in its predictability, now felt different, almost fragile. The streets where children once played freely and neighbors waved to one another became quiet, subdued, as if the town itself had been scarred by the events of that night. Alex's accident was the topic of hushed conversations, a story repeated and reshaped with each retelling. Everyone knew that what had happened could have been avoided, and the weight of that knowledge pressed heavily on the community. Alex spent those days in the hospital, recovering from broken bones, bruises, and the lingering shock of what had occurred. Friends and family came to visit, their faces etched with worrying and relief, grateful that he had survived but haunted by how close the outcome had come to something far worse. Doctors spoke of the physical damage, of the careful steps required for him to regain strength, but the emotional scars were harder to treat. Every glance at a road, every car engine's roar, reminded him of the night that had changed everything. The excitement and thrill he had felt on that Friday evening were replaced with a deep, reflective awareness of risk and consequence. Authorities continued their investigation into the stolen car and the identity of the driver who had fled. It became clear that the thief was a minor, a teenager struggling with circumstances that drove him to make dangerous choices. There was no justification for the crime, but understanding the motivations added layers of complexity to the story, showing that tragedy often emerges from desperation and poor judgment rather than inherent malice. Interviews, witness accounts, and security footage pieced together the timeline, each detail painting a clearer picture of the chaos that had unfolded. The community grappled with questions of accountability, questioning what could have been done differently and whether warning signs had been missed. For Alex, returning home brought both relief and unease. The familiar streets no longer felt as safe as they once had. Every corner, every intersection seemed to hold a memory of that night, a reminder of how quickly life could spiral out of control. Friends and neighbors offered support, their presence a comforting reminder that he was not alone, yet the experience had fundamentally altered his sense of freedom. Simple drives that once brought joy now carried hesitation, and the thrill of adventure was replaced with cautious awareness. Brookfield itself began to reflect on the event. Town meetings discussed safety measures, community programs, and ways to prevent similar incidents. Conversations about responsibility, choices, and the vulnerability of life became central to local discourse. The tragedy had left a mark not only on those directly involved but also on the fabric of the community, a lesson woven into the collective memory. Though the headlines faded over time, the story remained alive in the hearts and minds of those affected. Alex's journey of recovery, the investigation into the stolen car, and the lingering questions about the driver's motives became part of Brookfield's history. The night that had begun with ordinary routines had ended in heartbreak, teaching lessons about caution, empathy, and the sudden fragility of normal life. The memory of the tragedy lingered like a shadow, a quiet reminder that a single choice, a moment of recklessness, could ripple outward with consequences that touched many lives in unexpected and permanent ways.